In this video, I will demonstrate how to install and run SynthEBD using Vortex. Support for Vortex isn't as polished as for MO2, but SynthEBD does allow for Vortex installation. To start, we'll go to SynthEBD's releases page and download the archive from the latest release. In this case, version 0.9.6.5 at the time of filming. I've already downloaded that, and I will extract it to a directory outside of the Vortex folder. For example, I can make a folder on my desktop and call it SynthEBD. Vortex. I'll go to the downloaded archive and extract the contents into that folder. While that's extracting, I'll go back to Vortex, and you'll see there are a couple mods that SynthEBD requires which I already have installed and deployed. You'll want to find those mods on the Nexus and download the versions that are appropriate for your game. If you're using AE or SSE 1.5.97 or higher, just download the main EBD file. If you're using VR or an earlier version of SSE, install the optional file over top of the main download. You will also need to download and install the appropriate version of JContainers for your version of Skyrim. A note about the SynthEBD folder. You'll want to make sure that lives outside of the Vortex directory, as I've had reports of SynthEBD failing to run when it's installed in the Vortex folder, and especially in the mod staging folder. Otherwise, you're free to put it wherever you'd like. Now we can set up SynthEBD. We'll first need to find the location of our staging folder, so we'll go to Settings and see where it lives. We'll go ahead and open it to copy the directory path. Now we can go back to our dashboard and add SynthEBD as a new program. We'll call it SynthEBD and select the target executable that we extracted. Click Save, and SynthEBD appears in the dashboard so we can launch it. We'll be greeted with a splash screen saying that we need to set up our Mod Manager integration, so we will do that first. Click on Mod Manager Integration and select Vortex in the drop-down list. It'll ask for the staging folder, so we will search for it and select that folder. The file path length limit here is the longest file path that SynthEBD will allow when it's installing textures. If it sees a longer texture path, it'll automatically try to rename and shorten it to comply with that limit. The Windows default limit is 260 characters, but I found when paths are that long, apps opened through MO2 can't see them. I haven't tested to see if Vortex has the same issue, but a limit of about 220 has been reliable for me. You can adjust that up or down as necessary. Now we can go back to the main menu. You'll want to select the version of Skyrim that you're using, and make sure that the game data directory is correct. If not, use the Select button to pick the one that's correct for you. You can check if you've picked the right one by going to the status log and asking it to print your environment. You should see all of the mods in your load order. We can also make a custom output folder so that SynthEBD doesn't write loose files to your data folder. Click Select, go to the staging folder, and I'll make a new folder called SynthEBD Output. If there's a better way to do any of this, let me know in the comments. I am not a Vortex user, and I arrived at the current integration strategy through trial and error. Now we can start installing config files for the textures that we want. These config files can be found in several locations. You'll usually find the ones I've made alongside the main SynthEBD release. But sometimes if I'm making small updates to SynthEBD, I won't want to re-upload all of the config files, so instead I'll put a link for where to find them. For example, you can see them here in the assets. These are the ones I've made. In addition to these, a couple other people have started contributing to the SynthEBD ecosystem. Most notably, Pomona has a page on the Nexus for newer humanoid skins. For the beast races, Cram42 has some config files on GitHub. I've already downloaded a couple of these archives from my main collection, and I'll show you how to install those. In the Textures and Meshes menu, go to the Install Config from Archive button, and find the downloaded zipped config file. We'll start with SynthEBD tempered skins for males. It'll ask which version of the config to install. You'll choose the one you need. Next, it'll ask you to select your downloaded assets, and you can click the link to open the download page. It'll tell you what file name it's expecting, but won't require you to submit that file. So if a texture artist updates their textures, but keeps all the same file names, you can still use the same config file. Select where that downloaded archive lives. And click Finish. Now that archive is going to be extracted and the installation will complete. Now we have a warning that at least one of the files was going to be longer than the path length limit, and it's modified that config file to comply with that limit. We don't have to do anything ourselves. Just click OK and let it extract. It'll tell you that you need to restart your mod manager in order for SynthEBD to see the installed textures. But if we're going to be installing multiple config files, we might as well install all of them before restarting. I'll now install tempered skins for females. It'll ask us a few questions as we're installing, such as what body type we're using. I'll select CBBE. Note that I need to have the CBBE mod installed as well, for these textures to look correct. Often for my config files, it'll ask if you want to use an accompanying BodyGen config file. If you're planning to use BodyGen to distribute body shapes, you'll want to say yes. If you don't want SynthEBD to manage body shapes, or are planning to use body slides instead, you can say no. Now we'll select our downloaded texture archive again. We have the same warning about file paths, and we'll press OK because SynthEBD handles that automatically. Finally, we'll install Bayesian skin. Most installers will ask what texture resolution you want. If you don't have a lot of VRAM, you'll want to pick a lower resolution. There can be other options. Here it's asking if you want normal subsurface or no more ugly bronze shine. Ugly bronze shine can depend on your ENB and lighting settings. You'll know it when you see it. If your setup is prone to this, you can pick that option. Now that we've finished installing config files, we'll close SynthEBD and go back to Vortex. I don't see an option to refresh the available mods, so I'll just close Vortex and reopen it. Vortex is going to complain that mods have been changed on the disk. Vortex doesn't like it when mods get added to the staging folder by anything other than itself. Again, if there's an experienced Vortex user who knows how to do this more gracefully, I'm open to feedback and updating the code. In the meantime, this is how it works, so I'll click Apply Changes. In the mods list, you'll see we have our new texture mods that SynthEBD installed, as well as the new output folder. We'll select and activate the texture mods and deploy them. Now we can relaunch SynthEBD. The textures expected by our installed config files should now be installed correctly. You can verify this by clicking the Validate Configs button in the Textures and Meshes menu. It will tell you if there are any expected texture files that it can't find. Now we can click the Run button. If you see warnings saying no valid asset packs could be applied, it's not an error. It just means you don't have any config files that apply to that particular NPC. For example, here I didn't install any config files for beast race women, although tempered skins covers males. We could install the config files from CRAM, and then those NPCs would be patched. At the end, you can see a summary of which NPCs were patched. If you want to see which textures went to which NPCs, you can open the Generated Combinations text file. Now we'll have the generated SynthEBD patch living in SynthEBD output, so we'll enable and deploy that mod. We'll have a warning about unresolved file conflicts. SynthEBD writes a fixed version of one of the EBD scripts. You'll want to make sure the SynthEBD version is the winner. Now you can launch SKSE to start the game.